Good morning, everybody. And I am saying good morning because I am in the Turks and Caicos Islands. I appreciate it's afternoon for some of you, but it is just around breakfast time here in the Caribbean. Can I welcome you? My name is Andrew Mitchell to the third and final day of the 33 Chancery Lane Annual Business Conference. This is our 2020 conference, COVID affected, so we are all online. I hope that it hasn't diminished the impact and effect of the speakers to date. From what I hear, it has been extremely good. Today we focus on Europe, which is why they've asked me in the Caribbean to chair the morning session. Logical. We have keynote speaker talking about cross-border investigations after Brexit, Charles Kuhn. I don't know, Charles, whether you will have divided that in two between a hard Brexit and a soft Brexit, but that will be interesting to hear. Charles is a dual qualified lawyer, an English barrister, and a German Rechtsanwalt. I hope I've pronounced that reasonably closely. He works in Clyde & Co.'s Regulatory and Investigations Group, having previously worked at the Crown Prosecution Service in England and Wales and the Financial Conduct Authority's Enforcement Division. Charles's practice has taken him into numerous cross-border investigations involving Germany, France on both the prosecution and defense side. So just before I ask Charles to speak, as I said he will, to cross-border investigations after Brexit, can I just say that what we'll do by way of format is hear Charles' keynote speech address. And then if during the course of that, people want to pose questions, please, on the chat line, I will pick some towards the end and we'll use whatever time we have left to deal with those questions for Charles, who I know is happy to deal with them. And after that, we will move to the next session, which is going to be chaired by Fiona Jackson from 33 Chancery Lane. And I will, just before I sign off, have the pleasure of introducing her. So in the meantime, can I welcome Charles Kuhn, Clyde & Co., please, to present his keynote speech. Again, good morning, everyone.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Andrew. Thanks for rubbing it in that it's morning in the Caribbean. So firstly, thank you very much for inviting me. And this is indeed quite a challenging topic to look into. For the purposes of this, I'm going to assume a hard Brexit because that's where the maximum impact will and the maximum divergences will occur. Now, the closer I looked at what the impact of a hard Brexit would be, the more surprised I was and the more concerned I was about the various changes to come. From what I've seen, the system is going to grow very much further apart with a hard Brexit. And I believe that we've been taking for granted a lot of the excellent cooperation in the past between the UK and the EU. At this stage, we still don't know what access we're going to have after in the new year to the Schengen information systems, to the data exchange under the PRUM agreements, access to Eurojust databases, Europol, ECRIS, that's the previous convictions register, and to what extent data protection issues are going to affect the cross-border cooperation. So for this purpose, I'm going to assume that next year the EAW will not be, the European Arrest Warrant will not be used, and that's in addition to the European Investigation Order not being used. Firstly, I'd like to highlight a few of my personal experiences which demonstrate the excellent level of cooperation that we've enjoyed in the past between the UK and the European Union. When I was at the FCA, we were looking at an insider dealing case. This involved a German banker being based in the UK, and he had two girlfriends, one in the UK, one in Germany, and he was passing price-sensitive information to them, and they affected insider trades on the back of that. At that time, they were both unaware of each other's presence. This all changed when the FCA decided to raid their premises, and simultaneous raids were carried out in the UK at the banker's premise, at his English girlfriend's premise, and in Germany and Frankfurt at his German girlfriend's premises. And I was asked as a group of FCA investigators and lawyers to go over to Frankfurt and to liaise with the German police. The raids were conducted simultaneously. They were very efficient. The next day we liaised with the German prosecutors and the German police, and they handed over a whole series of documentation. Within that day, we received hard drives, we received files, USB sticks, and we loaded them into a bag and set off to Brussels in order to get the Eurostar. At Brussels, we didn't have to put our bags through scanners because we had liaison officers at the Customs and Border Patrol. That was absolutely no problem. And a couple of hours later, we were at the FCA premises, well, actually 4 hours later, arrived in King's Cross and then off to Canary Wharf, and we handed over those documentation to the FCA data people. And that's how quickly that worked with the exchange with the instruments which we had in place. And we would obviously question whether such a speedy operation would indeed occur in today's, when we crash out of Brexit. Now, another of my favorite, let's say, operations was in 2006, where the Home Office sent a number of English prosecutors, English policemen, including a gold commander, to assist with the security at the World Cup in Germany. And contrary to what a lot of my friends think, that wasn't a jolly where I would simply would spend our time watching the football matches and then spending the rest of our time debriefing in German beer gardens. It was very hard work. We had to liaise with the German federal ministries of justice, the state ministries of justice, the local prosecutor's office across something like 5 or 6 German states. As part of the operation, we had to liaise with, we had to liaise with the German police, the riot police, the equivalents of the SWAT teams. And this was the K9 teams. There were undercover officers involved in this entire operation. And that required a large amount of work. Now, the cooperation was so good that 250,000 English fans traveled to Germany and enjoyed a very peaceful World Cup. This is all due to how effective the data exchange was between the various agencies involved. And again, we question, is that how it would play out in a future operation? If there was any violence, it was mostly on the football pitch. Italy were known for getting a series of red cards. In the famous Battle of Nuremberg between Portugal and Holland, 16 yellow cards are issued, 4 red cards, and you'll no doubt remember the famous headbutt when Zinedine Zidane got sent off in the final. But having seen the violence more on the pitch, 250,000 English fans went back. There were very few violent incidences. A further example of unprecedented level of cooperation was during the Euribor-Libor proceedings. And there you had the Germans, the UK Financial Conduct Authority liaising with the Serious Fraud Office. In turn, they engaged with the German banking regulator, BaFin, I'm not going to say the entire word, and the various German local prosecutors. In addition, they liaised with the French prosecutors and the French AMF, which is the equivalent of the FCA and BaFin. Now, as a result of those investigations, a number of Germans traveled to London to stand trial. Ultimately, they were acquitted. A number of French people were also required to be extradited. And there was a lot of issues around their various extraditions. But that demonstrated, again, the information exchange between the FCA, SFO, and the German authorities demonstrated how effective the European instruments, the EU instruments of data sharing were. Now, what I'd like to do is just wind back a little bit and assume that those operations were taking part in days when there wasn't a European arrest warrant. So looking more towards the future. The immediate effect of the no European arrest warrant would have meant for our insider dealing case that the German suspect would have resisted extradition and she would not have travelled out to Southwark Crown Court. Germany, as a result of Brexit, is no longer extraditing its citizens outside of the EU. And that's going to be a big problem for future cross-border cooperation. What it means is that now the FCA would be asking the German authorities to conduct an investigation into Germany and prosecute the said individual in Germany. There's also disparities in sentencing. German prosecutors would probably have given up to 2 years on a suspended sentence for this. The UK would have probably given on a guilty verdict 2 to 4 years. And so the question arises, is the German prosecutor even going to get out of bed for this in order to prosecute offences which primarily occurred in England? Especially now as we're going to have competing capital markets. Same goes for France as well. 2 Euribor individuals resisted extradition, and that was even with a European arrest warrant. So if we don't have a European arrest warrant going forward, it's highly likely that it's going to be difficult to extradite people over to the UK. And that would have changed the complex of the Euribor investigations, the LIBOR investigations, considerably. Had they been tried in Germany, it's unlikely they would even have got an indictment off the ground. So I mentioned that Germany is one of the countries no longer extraditing to the UK. There's 2 other countries. One of them is Austria and the other is Slovenia. Now, Slovenia, for practical purposes, is a small country, and we don't assume it will have a great deal of relevance. I guess we'll only hear headlines if the current First Lady decides, if her husband decides to get a Slovenian passport and do a run into Slovenia to avoid the US Southern District. Don't know how good golfing is in Slovenia, it's quite mountainous, but that's the only time they're really going to hit headlines. Austria does enjoy considerable cooperation with the UK authorities, and we expect that will impact on a number of proceedings if they can't extradite Austrians to the UK. I mentioned Germany again. Germany is obviously a very large country. A number of individuals have gone to the UK in the past to stand trial, and the result is they will no longer be able to stand trial. So the question as a result of all of this then arises whether the UK will be a country to which European nations will not extradite to. And that's entirely possible because there are a lot of challenges, even with a European arrest warrant. Now, we've seen a number of arguments being raised to resist extradition to England. Some of them are the questions of prison conditions. That's been raised by Irish extraditions to the UK. It's been raised by Dutch extraditions to the UK. Currently, prison conditions, as we know it in the UK, are appalling. You've got people in custody who are kept in their cells for 23 hours a day, issues of sewage, rats, general medical care in the prisons. And seeing as the judges in Europe will no longer need to just simply look at formalities, such as, is there a prima facie case? Is there dual criminality? They're going to be looking at more areas of attack that are going to be presented to them. And we've seen, for example, this already happening in Germany a few years ago. The question of a right to silence was raised. We don't have an absolute right to silence in the UK. Other countries do. In the UK, we can also prosecute somebody for not providing their password to a computer. That would also be seen, that would be questioned quite considerably by a member state of the European Union. The question of the case backlog. We have an enormous case backlog at the moment, over 40,000 Crown Court cases. That existed even before COVID days. So the question is that something that could be attacked by suspects resisting extradition to the UK? The UK may find itself in a position that it needs to give guarantees that listings will happen very quickly. It will need to give guarantees about prison conditions, what a person might end up in. And I think, speaking to a lot of my colleagues in Germany and France, that that is going to change the issue of quite simple extraditions to the UK. Some of these points, the question of a right to silence, the question of whether a hung jury triggers double jeopardy or breaches European principles such as nobis in idem, they will arise. For them taken singularly, they might not be enough to scupper an extradition proceeding to the UK, but cumulatively, in a case where judges probably aren't as generous towards us in terms of finding a way to extradite people, that again could change the landscape considerably. So one of the key themes I've been looking at is that if we can't extradite people from France and Germany and Austria and Slovenia anymore that easily to the UK, are we then outsourcing our law enforcement by effectively asking foreign prosecutors to prosecute our cases? And I think that question really does arise. There's absolutely no question that if, in the case of Madeleine McCann, the German suspect couldn't be extradited to the UK because he's a German national, that there is no question that the German prosecutor would go after him vigorously, robustly, would have the resources to do the job. But in the case of every capital markets infringement or every fraud where the main wrongdoing happens in the UK, I find it unlikely that prosecutors who have limited resources, who have a huge caseload are simply going to dedicate their time to prosecuting offences which occurred in England and where people can't be extradited to. So one other sea change, and this is a little bit of a long-term prediction that I'm going to allow myself, is in the question of drug offences. Now, technically, drugs might not fall under business crime, but since they are predicate offence and fall under the proceeds of crime that's flow into businesses, I'll look at that. We've seen stunning results in the United States with regards to drug regulation. Most states have now decriminalized drugs. They have regulated medical marijuana and and recreational marijuana. Oregon, for example, is a state which has decriminalized hard drugs. So it's no longer now, you can no longer be charged for possession of a hard drug such as cocaine or heroin. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this is because we expect similar patterns to occur in Europe. Portugal has decriminalized possession of hard drugs. Germany is very liberal in terms of medical marijuana. And the UK is lagging very far behind. We don't really have the framework yet for a regulation of soft drugs, let alone hard drugs. Yes, medical marijuana can be prescribed on the NHS, but again, the problem is that due to costs, it's simply only one prescription has ever been issued. And if we now have a different framework or approach in the European states, Switzerland has decriminalized drugs, I'm including them for the purposes of Europe. Germany, likewise, Holland is also very liberal. The question is, if we can't extradite people again to the UK, are we going to ask European prosecutors to assist with our operations, with our drug warrants, with gathering evidence, when the attitude in Europe is changing towards drugs? And I think the answer is no, it's going to change considerably. We will not have the same level of cooperation or willingness that we previously had. So in summary, I'm certainly going to need time for the dust to settle to know what treaties are going to be in place, what instruments are going to be available. But it looks like Brexit has already become a significant game changer for international law enforcement. And I think, yes, it has completely changed the landscape. Thank you.
Charles, thank you very much indeed. And that was Brexit to the United Kingdom. The Europeans are plainly going to want suspects who are in the United Kingdom in Europe. Apart from anything else, the center of financial activity is still going to be focused on London, even if some of it drifts away into the European Union. What do you say about it that way round? And number one, and number two, I have the other side of this is, of course, the Danes and their carbon issues, which of course has found its way into the United Kingdom as well. How are the Europeans going to work with the United Kingdom authorities in terms of getting people out of the United Kingdom into Europe?
I think that still remains to be seen. I mean, at the moment, we haven't had sight of the framework which is going to exist. But there is no bar, generally, there is no constitutional bar to English nationals being extradited to Germany, whereas there is a very hard bar arising from the constitution which prevents German nationals going to the UK. So you may well end up in a situation where you don't have parity, and that you could say that is politically not acceptable for us, and it'll be down to negotiations. But I haven't seen anything about how these negotiations are taking place.
You speak of constitutional bar on Germans being extradited to the UK. Does that exist at the moment in any event? Is there a restriction on Germans being constitutionally extradited to the UK even under the European arrest warrant?
Yes. So it all changed when we left in February this year. Left the EU in February this year. And the German constitution had been amended so that extraditions to the EU were possible because of the way the EU is seen as a supranational organization in which Germany participates. That was the rationale for changing the articles in the constitution. But the moment we left the EU, that changed. They would have to change the constitution now to extradite individuals.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Charles, that was extremely interesting, eye-opening. The consequences, the unintended consequences, no doubt, of what lies ahead are fascinating and going to cause, I'm sure, ripples across Europe. They're even causing ripples here in the Turks and Caicos Islands because suddenly everybody's woken up to realize that there are no more European grants for building corrupt causeways. Anyway, can I hand over to Fiona Jackson, who's going to take over now for the next session.